Welcome to the Practical NLP podcast with me, Andy Smith. This week we start to get to grips with strategies, our internal programs for doing what we do, both problems and the things we're good at. During this podcast we'll be learning how we can discover these programs, change them, and even install new ones. Remember, you can find show notes for this episode at nlppod.co.uk. And if you search on Practical NLP on the iTunes or Google Play app stores, you can get a free listening app for this podcast, which you can upgrade in-app to get access to all the back issues and episode transcripts. Sometimes, when I'm explaining the programming part of NLP to an audience, I will first ask them to cross their arms. Try it now. I should add the usual disclaimer here, don't do this if you're driving. This may seem like a very trivial exercise, but there's more to it than it first appears. First, you would have done a mental check, a test, on the current state of your arms to see if they were already crossed. If they were, you didn't need to do anything. If they weren't, you would perform what at one level is a simple operation, crossing your arms, although if you chunk down it involves quite a few different muscle movements. Finally, you do another check or test, are they crossed? Yes, they are, and you would stop or exit that little mental program. Then I point out to the audience that their arms are crossed a certain way. For most people, one hand is on top of the opposite arm and the other hand is tucked under the other arm. And that's probably the same way they've always crossed their arms. And I ask them to cross their arms the other way. This time their first check or test is a little different. They form some kind of criteria for how crossing their arms the other way would be. Maybe how it would look, maybe how it would feel, or both, and then check if their arms are already crossed that way. And of course they're not. So they go on to the next step, a series of operations to get their arms crossed in this new way. This can take a while because they're pretty much having to make it up as they go along. There isn't a pre-programmed or automatic sequence available like there is for crossing their arms the normal way. When they think they might have got there, or they run out of ideas, they do another check. Are my arms crossed the other way? Usually, a minority of them have got there. Their arms are crossed in a mirror image of how they normally are, and they can exit that strategy and stop. Some other people realize that they haven't managed it, and go round the loop again, recrossing their arms in an attempt to get there. Next time they test, a few more have got there and stop, and some others go round the loop again 2 or 3 more times. Eventually, another strategy kicks in which we could call giving up. So you always get some people who just leave their arms folded in the quote-unquote wrong position. This is a great exercise for loosening up a skeptical audience, by the way. If you come in and a number of them have already got their arms folded in that go on, impress us kind of posture. It's no wonder that many people don't find crossing their arms the other way easy. Probably every time they've folded their arms since they first had arms to fold, they've done it the usual way. The program, or strategy, as we call it in NLP, for folding their arms has become automatic, and they don't normally have to think about it. Even if they do manage to end up with their arms folded in the opposite way, it usually feels very strange. The exercise is just a device for demystifying the idea of programs in neuro-linguistic programming. And it's also good for illustrating the concept of strategies. So, what are strategies in NLP, and why are they important? Strategies are like the programs we use to run our neuro-linguistic computer, and the results we get are like the outputs of those programs. Tad James, one of the NLP trainers that I trained with, defines a strategy as a specific syntax of external and internal experience which consistently produces a specific outcome. What does this mean? To get to any given result or outcome, we go through a series of internal representations, external information gathering, and movements. Syntax is a term from linguistics meaning that things are in a particular order. The order that things are in, whether it's word order or a sequence of experiences, matters. It makes a difference to the outcome. The cat chased the mouse gives you a very different internal representation to the mouse chased the cat, as you'll know if you've ever seen a Tom and Jerry or indeed Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. To put it another way, a strategy is like a recipe. A recipe has a specific outcome, maybe a delicious chocolate cake. some ingredients and a series of steps to go through to get from raw ingredients to yummy cake. You could maybe vary the ingredients that go into the recipe, but keep the same steps, and you might end up with a different kind of cake. But if you change the order of the steps, put the ingredients in the oven before you mix them, or miss out a step altogether, like omitting to put the cake in the oven at all, you're going to end up with something totally different. It might be a mix of raw ingredients, it might be a lump of charcoal, but it won't be a cake. So the syntax or order of the steps is actually more important in some ways than the content or ingredients that go into them. Just to repeat, in NLP we're interested in the structure of the process rather than the content. We're interested in how you represent and process your internal representations rather than the details of what those representations are. And once we know what these strategies are, we can use them, we can improve them, and we can install new ones if we need them, for ourselves and for other people. So why elicit strategies? Well, we have strategies for everything we do, for deciding what to eat, for motivating ourselves, for putting things off, for falling in love, for deciding if someone is interested in us, for buying, for reassuring ourselves that we bought the right thing, for walking, for learning. In fact, we have strategies for everything that we do. We even have strategies for our problems. And often those strategies work extremely well. Practice makes perfect, and we can produce the problem result perfectly every time. As Milton Erickson said, people aren't broken. They don't need fixing. People are experts at getting the results they get. And the more people practice their strategies for having problems, the better at it they get. If you did something different, take out a step of the strategy or add a new one in, you'd get a different result. So if you know what your own strategies are, you can arrange things to suit your strategies. You can also improve your strategies for getting what you want, to get better results in a shorter time. And you can change your strategies for having problems, to get a different outcome that you would like more. If you know what someone else's strategies are, you can sell to them better, manage them better, teach them or coach them better. You can relate to them in a way that they like. You can get the results you want or help them to get the results they want in a shorter time, better and more elegantly. You can also model the strategies of someone else who's really good at something so that you can get similar results and teach those strategies to others. How would it be if all your salespeople did what your top salespeople do? Or everyone in your company could think like your top creative people? If you want to know how to do that, then keep listening. We're going to look at the standard NLP model for understanding how strategies work, known as the TOTE model. You've already met the TOTE model, TOTE standing for Test, Operate, Test, Exit, in the description of the arm folding exercise at the beginning of this program. It really is that simple. The TOTE model is a way of describing the structure of our strategies, so that we can isolate and identify particular strategies and tell one from another. This simple model makes the difference between being able to elicit, use, modify and design strategies, or not knowing where to start, which is where most people who don't know NLP would be. Just as storytellers make sense of human experience and history by selecting out patterns with a beginning, a middle and an end, we can isolate strategies by looking at particular outcomes. If a person decides consciously or unconsciously that they want a particular outcome, their strategy for getting to that outcome starts up. When they get to that outcome, they exit that strategy. The TOTE model is an elegant and simple way of getting from a present state, whatever that is, to a desired state, whatever that is. It comes originally from the book Plans and the Structure of Behavior by Pribram, Miller and Galanter, published in 1960. At that time, behaviorism, based on the stimulus-response conditioning that we've already met in anchoring, was the dominant school of psychology. It was great for explaining simple behavior in a response to a stimulus, like a dog salivating at the sound of a bell. It couldn't really explain more complex behaviors like language, for example. So Pribram, Miller and Galanter came up with a new idea drawn from computer programming and based on the idea of outcomes. That just as programmers write programs to produce particular results, our minds develop strategies to achieve particular outcomes. That can explain behaviors that are a lot more complex. So, what is the structure of the TOTE model, and how can a simple model like that explain complex behaviors? Have a look at the diagram of the TOTE model in the show notes. We'll quickly explain what each step does. The first test is the one that sets the whole process off. It's a comparison of the current state with the desired state. The first test essentially asks, have we achieved our goal yet? And the specifics of what the goal is and the criteria going into that comparison varies depending on which strategy it is. So a strategy for eating could be triggered by comparing the present state of how hungry you feel with the desired state of full or satisfied. If the answer to the question, have we achieved our goal yet, in this case, do I feel satisfied, is yes, we exit the strategy without doing anything. If the answer is no, in other words, the feeling of hunger is sufficiently different from the desired state, we continue on to the next stage, the operate stage. The operate stage is one or more steps that could be gathering information from the outside world, performing some action, remembering something, making comparisons, or creating internal representations. In the case of the eating strategy at a very high level, the steps would consist of choosing something to eat. This would actually be another strategy that's called from within the current one, like a subroutine, if you're familiar with programming, and eating some of it. Then you do the second test, the one that tells you whether the strategy is complete enough. This is always a comparison to answer the question, have we achieved our goal yet, using the same criteria that were established by the first test. So in this case, do I feel satisfied now? If the answer is yes, then we exit the strategy. That's the final part of the model. If the answer is no, we loop round and repeat the operate stage again. This is the clever thing about the TOTE model. If we didn't have that repeat loop, you would need a range of different eating strategies to cover the situations from very hungry to a little bit hungry, with different amounts of eating in each one. Because you've got that repeat loop, you can just have a simple set of steps in your operating section and repeat as necessary until you get your outcome. In principle, that covers all situations, from when you're a tiny bit peckish to when you want a full meal. All of our behavior, everything we do, results from these patterns of neurological processing. If a particular strategy is triggered, the behavior happens. If the strategy is not triggered, the behavior doesn't happen. Let's have a look at the elements in the strategy. The steps within a strategy are external or internal representations. And there are only 6 ways to represent experience, which you're already familiar with from rep systems and eye-accessing cues. Yes, VAKOG, plus internal dialogue or auditory digital, as it's known. Each of the sensory elements can be external, taking in information from the outside world, or internal. So we could have visual external, seeing something. If we have a visual internal representation, that could be constructed, imagining what something would look like, or remembered. And the same would be true for each of the other senses. With kinesthetic, we have a few more distinctions because feeling covers a lot of different experiences. So we could have tactile, which is touching something. It could be proprioceptive, which is knowing where a part of your body is in relation to the rest of you. That's how you can eat something with your eyes closed without whacking the spoon into your forehead. There's also balance, and what's called in NLP metakinesthetic, which is emotions or feelings. It's called meta because we have feelings about something rather than it being a primary sensory experience. And all of these could be imagined or remembered or actually happening now. When we're eliciting a strategy from someone, we can use the abbreviations that you're already familiar with from eye-accessing cues to note down the steps in the strategy. This is convenient for 2 reasons. One is that we're interested in how each step is represented rather than the content of what it's representing. And the other is that it's much quicker to write VE or AD rather than writing a description of what they were seeing or saying to themselves. The other aspect of each element that we're interested in is its submodalities, because the intensity of the submodalities will influence how effective the strategy is. In a motivation strategy, for example, a big, bright, colourful visual of the desired result will be much more motivating than a small, grey, still picture. If there's an internal dialogue step, if the tone is too critical, it may have a demotivating effect. By the way, if one of the steps is taking a physical action like swinging a pickaxe or trying on some clothes, we generally class that as kinesthetic external, or KE. We'll have a quick look at some refinements of strategy notation later. So you may want to have a think about some of your own commonly used strategies in terms of the TOTE model. What's your test or trigger that decides you when to start running the strategy? What are your steps in the operate section? How do you decide when to stop? Or how do you decide when to loop round and do some more of the operate? That's it for this week's podcast. Next time we'll find out how to elicit somebody's strategy for doing something well or for having a problem using the TOTE model. As ever, you can find the show notes for this podcast at nlppod.co.uk, and you can also do yourself a favor by signing up for the Coaching Leaders newsletter to get practical tips, how-tos, and book reviews at coachingleaders.co.uk. When you visit the website, you may also notice that I've revamped the Coaching Leaders web store, which is now at webstore.coachingleaders.co.uk. Same products in there for now. I'll be adding more very soon. You may also want to come to a live event, of which I have 2 coming up in the next couple of months. If you're a coach or if you manage or work with teams, you'll want to come to the one-day workshop I'm running in June called How to Work with the SCORE Model, so you can learn an easy-to-use model for coaching teams and individuals. Although the SCORE model comes from NLP, it's easy to use even if you don't have prior NLP training. That's in Vila Moura on Portugal's beautiful Algarve coast on June the 7th, and you can find details at coachingleaders.co.uk in the courses section. I'm also presenting at a one-day event for business owners and executives in the Birmingham area of the UK on the 15th of July. This event is called Rewired, and it's all about how to metaphorically rewire your brain for career and business success. I'll be sharing some practical ways you can use anchoring and submodalities to feel more confident, make better decisions, and perform at your peak. Again, you can find details on the coachingleaders.co.uk website in the courses section. See you next time.